Tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks for having me along today. As Prudence has shown you in the handouts in your booklet, you'll see at the bottom of the Smokefree Working Group model there that research and evidence underpins all the activities in the model. So as researchers, we have a very important part to play in providing evidence for achieving our national goal. We know that there's strong support in New Zealand for a Smokefree 2025, so today I'll be presenting evidence for research studies which demonstrate support for smoke-free outdoor areas in New Zealand. Now, in 2008, Hislop and Thompson's research found that 23 councils in New Zealand had smoke-free outdoor area policies. Research that we undertook in 2012 found that this had increased to 47. So in the 4 years since Hislop and Thompson's research, the number of councils with a smoke-free outdoor area policy had doubled to 70%. And I'm sure there have been more since we undertook this research. So this is great news, but what do these policies cover? The locations covered by the policies in 2012 are indicated by the light green bars in the graph. And the most common locations to be covered by the policies were playgrounds, sports grounds, parks, council events and entrances to council-owned buildings. Now 8 councils also had considered extending their policy further, and these are indicated by the dark green bars. So this research has shown that New Zealand local authorities are increasingly adopting smoke-free outdoor area policies that cover the green spaces. However, there was little evidence in this research that councils were prepared to consider extending their policies further into other public spaces. But despite this, there continues to be high public support in New Zealand for smoke-free outdoor areas among non-smokers and smokers. Now, so just going back a few years, to gauge current support, HSE surveyed people's attitudes towards smoking at outdoor sports fields and courts from 2003 to 2007. And this graph shows the percentage of adults that thought it was not at all acceptable to smoke in these areas over these 4 years. So as you can see, this increased from 35% in 2003 to 51% in 2007. In 2007, to better understand views about the acceptability of smoking in outdoor areas, people's attitudes towards smoking in 4 additional areas were surveyed. Over 3/4 of adults said that it was not at all acceptable to smoke at a children's outdoor playground, and 1/3 of adults thought it was not at all acceptable to smoke while at the beach. Similar views were expressed about smoking at city squares and local parks and reserves, with around 4 out of 10 adults saying it was not acceptable to smoke in these areas. In 2008, a survey of smokers 18 years and over was undertaken to find out if they thought smoking should be allowed in certain outdoor areas. So this included in cars with preschool children, playgrounds, entrances to council-owned buildings, lifeguard patrolled beaches, and outdoor seating areas of pubs. Now, there was a wide range of support for these new smoke-free areas, with only 2% of respondents favouring smoking being allowed in all these areas. And out of a possible score of 6, 59% had a score of 3 or higher, representing support for at least 3 new completely smoke-free areas. So overall, attitudes to new smoke-free areas found there was a clear majority of support for restriction on smoking in cars with preschool children, anywhere in outdoor eating areas and council-owned playgrounds. In 2012, a survey was undertaken with smokers and non-smokers aged 15 years and older to find out which measures people supported for achieving a smoke-free 2025. Overall, there was strong support for extending smoke-free outdoor areas to include children's playgrounds, sports grounds and areas outside building entrances. But the main level of support was over 60% for smoke-free patrolled beaches, footpaths in shopping areas, parks and reserves, and 56% for smoke-free outdoor areas of pubs, bars and cafes. Now, support for the measures tested was lower among smokers than non-smokers. Nevertheless, support was high among smokers for interventions that had an impact on children. Young people in New Zealand also support interventions that could help achieve this goal. Most respondents in a 2012 survey of 14 to 15-year-olds supported the tobacco control measures. So 71% supported having fewer places where tobacco could be sold. 63% supported raising the price of tobacco. 59% thought that smoking should be banned outdoors where young people go. And 57% thought that tobacco should not be available for sale in New Zealand in the next 10 years. And this support had all increased since 2009. Public support is also growing internationally for smoke-free outdoor areas. In 2009, New Zealand researchers reviewed available international research on public attitudes to smoke-free outdoor areas. And this research indicated in a number of jurisdictions, the majority of the public supports restricting smoking in various outdoor settings, and this appears also to be increasing over time. So what this tells us overall is that most adults and youth support smoke-free outdoor area policies, particularly those that are in areas where children frequent, and that this support is increasing over time. Although smokers' support is lower than non-smokers, there is still a reasonable amount of support among this group. So what do we know about business support for smoke-free outdoor areas? A survey of nearly 200 business owners and managers was undertaken along the Golden Mile in Wellington to investigate the attitudes of business people to a possible smoke-free streets policy. Now, support for making the Golden Mile smoke-free was 43%, and the remaining respondents were opposed to that. There was significantly higher support among business people who are non-smokers versus smokers. But the important finding here is that overall, 83% of respondents stated that the Golden Mile, smoke-free Golden Mile, would either have a positive or negligible impact on their business. In fact, only 17% said it would have a negative impact. Non-food businesses were more likely to report a positive response. So the likely business impact of smoke-free streets policy was not a concern for a large majority of the businesses. And so the take-home message from this research is that this may not be a significant barrier to policy development. And as we've just heard from Richard, this was not a significant barrier in Melbourne. Now, there hasn't been a lot of further academic research published on business perceptions of smoke-free outdoor areas in New Zealand. However, there are a number of international reports, particularly in Australia and other countries around the world. But I'm also aware that there are surveys being undertaken in local areas around New Zealand, which will be really good for providing local knowledge about business people's perceptions. And I think Amanda will be talking about that later on. But drawing parallels to the debate a decade ago concerning smoke-free indoor bars and restaurants, there was a perception that businesses would suffer under new smoke-free legislation. But a report by the University of Auckland stated that this is not the case, and in fact businesses can be positively impacted through smoke-free policies. So following the introduction of the Act, New Zealand retail trade figures for cafes, restaurants and clubs steadily increased through to May 2014. Concerns about a fall in employment did not materialise. After the initial resistance to the Act, the proportion of smoking and non-smoking patrons did not change between 2003 and 2006. And the Act did not appear to impact on the number of visitors coming to New Zealand. Surveys by HSC with bar managers before and after the implementation of the indoor smoking ban found that overall support for smoking bans increased significantly among the bar manager cohort in the period following the introduction of this legislation, as did agreement that smoking bans did not affect patron numbers or venue profits, and belief that smoking bans mean patrons spend less and put pubs out of business decreased significantly. So it can be suggested from these findings that the same debate could be considered for outdoor dining in New Zealand. Internationally, a review of the health and economic impacts of smoke-free legislation states that there is clear evidence that smoke-free legislation does not hurt restaurant and bar business, and in some cases may improve, as we've just heard from Richard. So many jurisdictions have extended smoke-free outdoor areas beyond green spaces, but few full evaluations have been undertaken. Surveys to gauge opinion towards smoke-free public transport stops and playgrounds in South Australia was undertaken. Approval rate for smoke-free public transport stops increased from 80% pre-legislation to 94% 18 months after legislation, and this also included a significant increase among smokers. Pre-legislation approval was high at 95% for smoke-free playgrounds, but this increased to 98%. In 2011, New York City parks and beaches became smoke-free, and surveys were undertaken in 2009 and 2012 to assess the impact of this legislation, and they used other areas of New York as a comparison. Now, the trend in the frequency of New York City residents noticing people smoking in the parks and beaches decreased significantly after the law took effect, and there was no comparable decline in the remaining states of New York. A longitudinal study of smokers in Ontario were asked every year between 2005 and 2011 whether or not they had been exposed to smoking on restaurant and bar patios in the past month. And this was examined in relation to behaviour change, so making a quit attempt or time to relapse after a quit attempt. And smokers who were exposed to smoking on patios were less likely to have made a quit attempt, and if they had made a quit attempt, they were more likely to relapse, and compared to those who had visited a patio but not been exposed to smoking. So this is really important as it shows the potential for smoke-free outdoor areas to support people who are quitting. Telephone interviews with smokers in California asked 4 questions to determine if there was a complete, partial or no ban on outdoor smoking in areas where these smokers lived. And the study found that a complete or partial ban was associated with smoking reduction and cessation. So not only do results indicate that smoking bans not only protect non-smokers from the harms of secondhand smoke, but they're also related to smoking reduction and quit attempts. A survey of young adult smokers in upper Midwestern USA found that banning smoking in park areas was associated with a heightened perception of the difficulty in smoking. Now, I thought you also might be interested in smoke-free universities. We undertook a survey with staff and students at the University of Otago in 2012 to find out if they supported a smoke-free campus or not. So results indicated strong support among staff and students for the smoke-free policies, with a mean probability score between 7.2 and 8.9 out of 10, so very strong support. Following this, the University of Otago became smoke-free in January 2014, and researchers at the university undertook an evaluation. They found that many participants smoked in secluded, peaceful spaces and derived considerable pleasure from the settings where they smoked. They were saddened to relinquish those spaces and concerned about being exposed while they were smoked. While resenting what many saw as an imposition, participants nonetheless saw the benefits for children and young people, and they accepted the logic of this policy. Self-reported and observed compliance was high, and several participants had made quit attempts or reduced their tobacco smoking to adjust to the new policy. And people also saw that the smoke-free spaces were helpful for quitters. We also undertook research with tertiary education institutions in New Zealand regarding smoke-free policy development and the implementation process. And this was not a rigorous evaluation, but participants reported that 100% smoke-free campus policies were easier to enforce than a designated smoke-free area policy, that there were minimal costs involved, and there were reports of staff members making quit attempts as a result. So the central argument is that outdoor bans will reduce smoking being modelled to children as a normal behaviour and thus reduce smoking uptake among young people. We know that children tend to copy what they observe and are influenced by the normality and extent of smoking around them. So as the managers of a large amount of public open space where communities live, work and play, local authorities have the potential to reduce the visibility and acceptability of smoking in public places, thereby contributing to our Smoke-Free 2025 goal. Today I've presented research evidence of support for smoke-free outdoor areas, and this should reassure councils that their smoke-free efforts are worth it because people, including smokers, support these measures. The evidence for smoke-free outdoor areas should be a mandate to extend these policies and show that they are likely to be favourable. A decade ago, changes to the Smoke-Free Environments Act, which banned smoking indoors, led to a shift in public opinion about exposure to secondhand smoke. And its introduction was associated with a reduction in secondhand smoke exposure, tobacco smoking prevalence, tobacco consumption, youth smoking rates, and an increase in smoke-free homes. Ultimately, the Smoke-Free Environments 2003 amendment saw New Zealand become a world leader in tobacco control and provided a plan for further development in this area, as well as improving the health and well-being of New Zealanders. But we're no longer a leader in this area, and many international jurisdictions have extended smoke-free areas either at the local or national level, as we've just heard about in Australia. So if we're to achieve our goal of being smoke-free in 10 years' time, then we need to have new strategies developed and implemented if we're going to achieve this goal. Thank you.